When I was a child, my grandmother was very strict on us about the way that we spoke. She would always say to us, enunciate. I remember we would occasionally use the word finna. In the same way that Soulja Boy in his Breakfast Club interview was like, Drake, she would say, finna, just offended. And so then the lecture on speaking proper English ensued. My mother curated the way that we presented ourselves to the world. She would say, walk with purpose. Don't walk with your hands in your pocket. Take that hood off. When you leave this house, look presentable. My father's purview included the way that we spoke as well. He would say, don't talk back. When you speak to adults, you say yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. Don't call adults by their first names. All of these instructions shaped the me that I presented to the world once I went out on my own. I became all of these things and was more palatable for the white spaces that I entered. You sound so smart. You're so well-spoken. You're not like the rest of them. Your hair is so straight. Are you Puerto Rican? I had changed all of these things about myself so that I could realize the potential that my family had envisioned for me. After all, everything that they taught me was because they just wanted the best for me. My story is not unlike many others. According to the Washington Post, as of 2018, they found that nearly a third of Americans were alive during the Jim Crow era. As such, many Black parents and grandparents had struggles with getting into interview rooms, let alone getting a seat at the proverbial table. My hairdresser told me a story of how her father had discouraged her from using African American Vernacular English, or AAVE. He would say, them white folks ain't gonna never hire you talking like that. She would respond and say, Daddy, I know how to switch it up. I just prefer to be myself. That's what makes me happy. Much like my hairdresser, I wanted to be the version of myself that made me happy, but I was afraid. I used to work for this government organization that primarily served 911 telecommunicators, you know, the people who would answer your 911 calls. And on occasion, we would visit the police departments to drop off supplies or whatever they needed. And a particular instance came to mind. We were visiting, and once we arrived, we actually had trouble figuring out where the entrance was. So my coworker noticed that there was an officer walking around outside, and she asked me to ask him for directions. So I did. I rolled down my window, and in the highest pitch and most standard American English way said, "Hi, can you point us to the door?" And my coworker, shooketh, by the way, said, "Who is that? Your voice changed so much just now." Now, the version of me that's standing in front of you right now would say, I'm Black, we're at a police department, and we're lost. And you just asked me to ask this white police officer how I can gain access to the inside of a police department. Please be so for real right now. How else am I supposed to speak? But that's now me. Then me was very different. I didn't realize I was code switching. It was just something I did naturally. And that moment was really pivotal for me, though. I realized I was adjusting myself so much to make everyone else around me comfortable. And I thought that these adjustments were my protection from racism, like a cloak of invincibility for any of the other dorks in the room like me. And I thought that as long as I had this cloak on, I would never take any hits, and this cloak was impenetrable. But I was wrong. My cloak was penetrated. The first time it happened, I was 13. You remember when food companies used to come together for the collab, like KFC and Taco Bell? Well, it was our tradition at my junior high to walk to the nearest Long John Silver's / A&W, like the root beer, but it's a restaurant. And the walk was about a mile long, so we would all walk together in a big group. As we were walking down the sidewalk, this big truck rolled by, and a gentleman leaned out of his window and shouted a racial slur at us. He even threw the F word in front of it for like extra seasoning. The second time it happened, I was visiting some family in Keller. And while I was on my way, I decided to stop at this little shop in Southlake, so I wanted to buy myself a cute top, you know, treat yourself. And so when I stopped in this shop, I was so excited to buy something cute, but that excitement quickly dwindled as I realized that as I'm browsing the aisles looking for the perfect top, I'm being followed by an employee of the store. I could keep going, but a key message became clear. All of this code switching, making myself small, and all of the ways I was changing myself to make myself more palatable, or what I call safe black, for the white spaces that I was entering, was not protecting me from racism. It, in fact, was perpetuating a false message, and a harmful one, too. Has anyone in here watched Insecure, the show on HBO? Or for those of you who have not seen it, the show follows several black women through various storylines, and one of whom is a lawyer at a predominantly white law firm. This character, Molly, encounters another black woman who is also hired at her firm. Her name is Rashida. You see, Rashida was unafraid of being herself authentically in the space, but this made some people uncomfortable. And so Molly's character pulls Rashida aside and says, if you want to be successful here, you gotta know how to switch it up a little bit. Now, switching it up, as Molly suggested, can certainly have some benefits. I have personally had some professional opportunities and successes from being this diet version of myself. But I just felt like that continues the status quo. And it encourages people of color who enter predominantly white spaces to strip themselves of all of the indicators of their cultural identity and instead put on the identity of the dominant culture. I wanted to be different. I wanted to be myself at work. And I just felt that as we are a society where companies are publicly committing themselves to prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion, are we really doing that if everyone is transforming themselves into essentially the same person? I just wanted to be me, my most authentic self. I wanted to be the version of me that I see every day. And I didn't want to have to conform to this version of professionalism, the definition that is set by the dominant culture. I wanted to show that my black girl magic was me wearing my hair naturally to work, was me being unafraid to speak AAVE if I felt like it. I wanted to feel like I could exist authentically at work and still excel at my job. And so, I did like Beyonce said, I got comfortable in my skin and cozy with who I am. First, it started with my hair. I wore an afro to work a couple of times. Then I did several twist outs. I quickly realized twist outs were not for me, too much work. So then I started crocheting in colored hair, orange, purple, teal. And I got comments and some questions like, is that your real hair? And some gracious compliments as well. But I was prepared for all of it. Then I started speaking out more publicly about racism. I noticed that people were becoming more curious about allyship and educating themselves about racism, and so I decided to start speaking out more publicly about it. In fact, I was working in a predominantly white field, so I thought, what a better place to start the conversation. And so soon after I started speaking out, I was invited to a government professionals podcast to talk about it with a friend and coworker who is here in the audience today. And shortly after, we were invited to write about it in a government professionals blog. And the thing that was so crazy is, like, y'all gotta realize, this was not me, like, at all. I was the quiet one who just internalized everything. I never said anything about anything to anyone. And so the ways in which my life was changing right before my eyes was literally blowing my mind. So I was really excited about all of the amazing opportunities. But aside from that, I felt free. I felt a freedom that I had never felt at work before. I felt like I could just be my most authentic self and not feel the exhaustion at the end of the day from the emotional and physical labor of keeping up the facade. And so I promised myself that wherever I go from here, I am going to continue being my most authentic self. And if anybody around me can't get jiggy with that, oh well, I do not care, because as long as I feel happy and I feel that I am being my most authentic self, then that's what mattered to me. Now, I am just one person, and maybe this journey is just my own, but I want this feeling for you all too. So here's what I will ask. Whatever your cultural identity, however you identify, show up as your most authentic self every single day. Take up space, just be you. Exist loudly. Everything that makes you unique is valuable to the spaces that you enter. So show that. You never know who you are empowering to do the same. Happy Black History Month. Thank you.